Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments and subscribe to our latest stories. Before I start, tell me where you are watching me from. I wonder which cities and towns will join me in this memory that will follow me for years. He thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. It all began one cool autumn evening, the kind where the air feels crisp against your cheeks and the trees shed their golden leaves in quiet surrender. I had just finished tidying the kitchen after dinner, the clinking of plates and the low hum of the dishwasher filling the silence of my home. My house has always been my safe space, warm lamps casting a soft glow across the living room, the faint smell of cinnamon candles lingering in the air, the kind of atmosphere that makes you want to curl up with a blanket and forget the world outside. But that night, something felt different. Not wrong, not heavy, just different. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. I was sipping tea by the window, looking out at the quiet street, when I noticed him, Michael. My neighbor. He was standing just outside, across his lawn, pretending to fumble with his mailbox even though he had already collected his mail earlier in the day. His movements were slow, almost hesitant, as though he wasn't sure whether he wanted to be seen. I smiled to myself. He thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. Michael had always been kind, the sort of man who carried himself with quiet dignity. Widowed for a few years now, he mostly kept to himself. We had shared short conversations over the years, weather, the garden, occasionally helping each other with groceries. Simple exchanges, yet there was always a warmth in them, an unspoken understanding that life had its complexities, and sometimes the best we could offer one another was a kind word. That evening, when I saw him lingering, I felt a tug at my chest. Something told me he wasn't out there for the mail. He wanted something, connection, perhaps, though he wasn't ready to ask for it directly. So, I opened my door, leaning against the frame as casually as I could. "Mailbox giving you trouble?" I called, my voice carrying across the stillness. He turned quickly, almost startled, then chuckled softly. "Caught me," he said, with a sheepish grin. I guess I was just avoiding going back into the empty house. There was a pause between us, one that could have felt heavy, but instead it hung in the air like a gentle bridge, inviting me to cross. I stepped down from the porch and walked toward him, the crunch of leaves beneath my shoes breaking the silence. "I was just making tea," I said. "Would you like to join me?" For a moment, he hesitated. Then his shoulders softened, and he nodded. "I'd like that." Back inside, the house felt warmer with him in it. He took off his coat, carefully folding it over the arm of the chair, and looked around as if rediscovering what it felt like to be inside a home filled with life. I poured him a cup of tea, and we sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The steam curled upward between us, a small but intimate veil that seemed to soften the edges of our words. At tea first, we spoke of ordinary things, his garden that was fading with the season, my work at the library, the way autumn seemed to come earlier this year. But as the minutes passed, the conversation deepened. He told me how the evenings were the hardest, how silence could sometimes feel louder than any noise. I listened, not just with my ears but with my whole self, and then, almost without realizing it, I shared something I hadn't said out loud in years. "Sometimes I sit by that window," I admitted, "and I wonder if anyone else is looking out at the same moment, feeling the same ache of wanting more but not knowing how to ask for it." Michael's eyes softened. There was no judgment in them, only understanding. "I think that's why I was at the mailbox," he said quietly. I wasn't ready to say it, but I didn't want to be alone either. We sat in silence after that, not awkward, not searching for words, just being. It felt like a rare kind of honesty, the kind that doesn't need to be dressed up with explanations or promises. I realized then that noticing someone, truly noticing them, was its own kind of gift. Later, when he left, he thanked me. Not for the tea, not for the company, but for noticing. "You saw me," he said at the door. "And that means more than I can explain." As I closed the door behind him, I leaned against it for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle over me. He thought I wouldn't notice, but I did. And in noticing him, I discovered something about myself too. That connection can arrive quietly, in the simplest of gestures, and change the way we carry our loneliness. That night, as I returned to my spot by the window, the street outside seemed less empty. The golden leaves drifted in the cool wind, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of anticipation. Something had shifted. Something had begun. He thought I wouldn't notice, But I did. The next evening came with a softer sky, streaks of pink and lavender fading into twilight. I told myself I wasn't expecting anything, yet I found my eyes drifting toward the window more than once. Part of me wondered if Michael would linger again, finding some excuse to step out of his house. Another part of me, the cautious part, reminded me that life rarely unfolds on command, but just as the sun slipped behind the trees, I saw him again, this time, not at the mailbox, but walking slowly down the sidewalk, hands tucked in his pockets, head slightly bowed. He wasn't pretending this time. He was simply there. I opened the door before I could second-guess myself. "Evening walk?" I asked, my voice carrying gently into the cool air. He looked up, his face lighting with that same quiet smile I had seen the night before. "Evening walk," he confirmed, though we both knew it was more than that. "Then come in," I said. "It's too chilly to be out there by yourself." Inside, it felt less like an invitation and more like a continuation of something already started. He placed his coat in the same spot as before, and I brewed another pot of tea. There was a comfort in the familiarity, a rhythm forming between us as though we'd been doing this for years. This time, though, the conversation wandered into deeper waters. He told me stories of his late wife, how she loved to bake in the fall, how she would hum old songs while folding laundry, how the smallest things about her absence still caught him off guard. He spoke slowly, as if each word was carefully chosen, but I could hear the weight behind them. I listened. I didn't try to fix his pain or soften it with reassurances. I simply let him speak. Sometimes that's all people need, not solutions, just space to be heard. At one point, he paused, staring into his cup. "I never thought I'd sit at someone else's kitchen table like this," he admitted. "After she passed, I convinced myself I'd be fine alone. That I didn't need anyone." He glanced at me then, his eyes searching. But I think I was wrong. His honesty caught me off guard. My chest tightened, not with pity, but with recognition. I, too, had built quiet walls around myself over the years. Walls of routine, of independence, of telling myself that needing others was a weakness. And yet here I was, sharing tea with a man who understood loneliness as intimately as I did. I decided to share something back. "After my divorce, I told myself the same thing," I said softly. "That I was stronger alone. That I didn't want to risk disappointment again. But some nights I feel the silence pressing in, and I wonder if I'm fooling myself." Michael nodded slowly, as though my words had been sitting in his own heart all along. The room grew quiet after that, the kind of silence that feels full rather than empty. His gaze held mine, steady and kind, and in that moment I realized something. This wasn't about filling each other's voids. It was about being seen in ways we hadn't allowed ourselves to be seen in years. After a while, we moved to the living room. The soft lamplight painted the room in amber tones, and the faint crackle of the old radiator filled the pauses between our words. We talked about books, about the places we had always wanted to visit, about the kind of peace that only comes from long walks in the early morning. At one point, I noticed him glancing around the room, taking in the family photos on the wall, the stack of novels by the chair, the half-finished knitting project on the table. He smiled faintly, almost to himself. "What is it?" "I asked you," he said simply. "You notice everything around you. But tonight I realized, you let me notice you, too." The words sank deep, more than I expected. I hadn't thought of it that way before. For so long, I had kept parts of myself tucked away, afraid of being misunderstood or dismissed. But with him, I felt no need to hide. When it grew late, he stood reluctantly, as though leaving meant stepping back into that silence he had been avoiding. At the door, he paused and said, "Thank you for tonight." I smiled. "It's nothing." "No," he said firmly, his eyes meeting mine. "It's not nothing. You see me. That matters." After he left, I sat quietly in the living room, the warmth of his presence still lingering in the air. I thought about how subtle connections can grow, how a glance from a window, a shared cup of tea, a few honest words can begin to unravel years of solitude. He thought I wouldn't notice, but I did. And maybe, just maybe, I was beginning to see more than I realized. He thought I wouldn't notice, but I did. A week passed, and in that time, something shifted quietly between Michael and me. It wasn't dramatic, not the kind of change you can measure by a single moment. It was in the small things. The way he seemed more at ease when he came over. The way I began leaving an extra mug on the counter before he even knocked. The way the silence of my house no longer felt heavy, but expectant. One evening, rain pattered softly against the windows, a steady rhythm that made the world outside blur into greys and silvers. I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard the knock. Not rushed, not hesitant, just steady, like he knew I'd be there. When I opened the door, he stood with damp shoulders, a sheepish smile, and a small bundle of late-blooming chrysanthemums in his hands. "They looked lonely in my garden," he said. "Thought they'd be happier here." I took the flowers, touched more deeply than I expected. He thought I wouldn't notice the care behind such a gesture, but I did. I placed them in a vase on the table, and suddenly the whole room seemed brighter, as though the flowers carried a little of his presence with them. That night, instead of tea at the table, we settled on the couch. The rain tapped at the windows while we spoke in softer voices, the kind reserved for trust. Michael told me about his younger days, how he used to drive across the country with his wife, no destination in mind, just chasing open roads and freedom. His voice softened when he described the way she'd laugh at nothing in particular, how she made even the ordinary days feel like an adventure. I listened, letting his memories fill the space. And then, almost without warning, he turned the conversation back to me. "You never talk much about your past," he said gently. "Do you mind if I ask?" For a moment, I hesitated. My past felt like a quilt with frayed edges, stitched together with moments of joy, heartbreak, resilience. But his eyes held no judgment, only quiet patience. "I married young," I began, fingers tracing the rim of my teacup. "We had good years, and we had hard ones. Somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing each other. We were in the same house but living separate lives. When it ended, I told myself it was for the best, but I carried pieces of that silence with me." Michael nodded, as though he understood that silence more than most. "And now," he asked softly. "Now," I said, meeting his gaze, "I'm realizing it doesn't have to stay that way." There was a stillness after that, but it wasn't empty. It was full of possibility, like the pause before the first note of a song. He didn't reach for my hand, and I didn't lean closer. We simply sat together, the rain stitching a quiet rhythm around us, and in that moment, it felt like enough. When the storm outside grew heavier, I offered him a blanket, and he laughed lightly. "You think I'll melt in the rain?" he teased. But he accepted it, draping it across his lap, his smile softening as he settled back. Later, as he prepared to leave, he lingered at the door. "You know," he said, almost as an afterthought, "you notice things about me that I don't even notice about myself. It's unsettling, in a good way." I smiled. "Maybe it's just easier to see someone when you're not trying to hide." He looked at me then, really looked, and there was something unspoken in his eyes, something that carried both gratitude and hesitation, as if he wanted to say more but wasn't ready yet. With a small nod, he stepped into the rain and walked back across the street. As I closed the door, I stood for a long moment, listening to the storm. My home no longer felt like a fortress against loneliness. It felt like a place waiting to be shared. He thought I wouldn't notice, but I did. And with each passing evening, I was noticing not only him, but the parts of myself I had tucked away, now slowly coming back to life. He thought I wouldn't notice, but I did. It was late November when everything came together. The air carried that early hint of winter, cold enough to make you pull your coat tighter, but not yet the biting chill of December. The trees stood bare against the grey sky, and my home, with its warm lamplight and lingering scent of cinnamon, had become more than just my refuge. It had become ours. Michael had been coming by more often, never announced, but never unwelcome. Some evenings we talked for hours, other times we simply shared space, him with a newspaper, me with a book, the silence between us easy and unforced. Yet beneath all of it, I felt a steady undercurrent building, as though both of us knew something was waiting to be acknowledged. That night, he arrived carrying a small wooden box. His hands were careful, almost reverent, as he placed it on my table. "I wasn't sure if I should bring this," he admitted. "But I think it's time." I looked at him curiously, and with a nod, he opened the box. Inside were old photographs, him and his wife, smiling in front of mountains, laughing on a beach, sitting in a diner booth with milkshakes between them. They were full of life, full of moments frozen in time. My chest tightened, not from jealousy or sadness, but from the sheer intimacy of what he was sharing. "She was my whole world," he said quietly. And for a long time, I thought my story ended when hers did. But then, his voice faltered. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine with a mix of vulnerability and strength. Then you noticed me. And I realized maybe there's still more to my story. The weight of his words settled deeply within me. I reached out, my hand resting gently on the edge of the box. "Thank you for showing me this," I said softly. "It means more than you know." He smiled faintly. "I was afraid you'd see it as me holding on. But the truth is, sharing it with you feels like letting go in the right way." We sat side by side, looking through the photos, honoring the life he once had without diminishing the connection growing between us now. And as we did, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet acceptance that our lives are made not by replacing what's lost, but by weaving new threads into the fabric of what remains. When the last photo was tucked back into the box, Michael closed the lid and let out a breath. He turned to me then, his voice low but steady. "I don't want to hide behind mailboxes or empty conversations anymore. I don't want you to wonder what I mean or don't mean. So I'll just say it, I'm glad you noticed me. Because noticing you has changed everything for me." The room felt still, as though even the air was waiting for my response. I held his gaze, my heart both heavy and light. "You thought I wouldn't notice," I whispered, "but I did. And I'm glad I did." There was no grand gesture, no sudden declaration of promises. Just two people, both scarred by their pasts, choosing to be seen fully for the first time in years. That was enough. More than enough. When he left that evening, there was a quiet certainty in his step, and as I watched him cross the street, I realized something important. Noticing isn't just about observing. It's about valuing, about giving weight to someone else's presence in a way that says, "You matter here." That I closed the door, but this time, it didn't feel like closing something off. It felt like opening something new. And as I stood in the warm glow of my home, I knew this was not the end of the story, but the beginning of one that would follow me for years. He thought I wouldn't notice, but I did. And in noticing him, I found a part of myself I never thought I'd see again.